What's new, crew? This video I am bringing you through the life of my very first sourdough bread. So we are starting from making our sourdough starter ourselves instead of buying it. So I wanted to make this video to show you a very novice first go at sourdough bread. I know that a ton of people are getting into it this year. Maybe you got some stuff for Christmas like I did, and you're just looking for maybe a beginner's video of somebody else who is also going to make mistakes and flub things up. So I just wanted to film my process very raw and real for you guys and talk about things that I wish I had done differently or different things that I had learned just kind of walking through this very first process. So here we are on December 31st making our sourdough starter, getting it up and running, just starting the process. I am starting with 100 grams of water with 100 grams of just all-purpose flour. I do not keep any other type of flour in my house. I make my own self-rising flour on occasion, but other than that, I only use all-purpose flour. I do plan on changing that heading into this year, but this is all I had at the time. So this is what I'm working with. You don't need to do a fancy like half and half. You don't need bread flour. You don't need whole wheat flour. If those are something you want, that's totally okay. But a huge part of me being afraid of starting sourdough bread was because I didn't think I had the right ingredients or the right materials, and that's just not true. All you really need is just a jar and some flour and some water. I read somewhere on Instagram, I think, that people have been making sourdough bread for thousands of years, long before we had kitchen scales or fancy Instagram recipes or anything like that. And that was something that I really needed to hear at the beginning of this journey, because for whatever reason, I was very intimidated. So I wanted to start off by saying that as well. People have been making sourdough bread long before any of these fancy kitchen tools were necessary. So don't be afraid to start, because I make mistakes. You're probably going to make mistakes, but it's okay. The bread still turns out, and the only way we're ever going to learn is by making some of these mistakes. So here we go. We're getting our sourdough bread started. It did say on my little instruction sheet there that it should be the consistency of pancake mix, and if it is a little thick, to go ahead and add a little bit more water. So that's what I had done there. It's more of a texture, so that's what I was doing. I had also read that you really want to clear the sides of your jar or your cup, whatever you're holding your starter in, to allow the starter to be able to rise really freely. So that's what I'm doing here, is clearing the sides. We are going to top it. All I had at the time was some paper towels, so that's what I used for the first couple of days. I just put it on there very loosely, which is fine. This was the next morning. It was very bubbly, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm amazing. This is perfect. This is going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be ready to use in 2 or 3 days, like everybody says. And that was not the case. But I ended up doing my discard, added in another 100 grams of water, another 100 grams of flour, giving it another mix, clearing my sides like I had done the day prior, and just putting the top very loosely back on and setting it back up in my kitchen and just kind of letting it go. And I did this process over and over and over again, as you're going to kind of see here. So I did this on January 1st. On January 2nd and January 3rd, my starter looked really good, and I had read in a ton of places that if your sourdough looks good, don't worry about feeding it, because it might not be hungry. Well, this is what it looked like on January 4th. It had a ton of hooch on the top, and I had learned that when it has a ton of hooch on the top, that means your sourdough starter is hungry. It is starving. So we fed it, and we did that process over and over and over again until January 11th. And that was when my sourdough starter was finally ready, after feeding it every single day from the 4th until the 11th, to actually make some bread. And I was very excited about this. So this was actually a snow day. My kids were home. My oldest was wanting to get into the kitchen with me. I said, yes, absolutely. Get up in here with me and let's make some bread. So being the novice, I just Googled sourdough bread recipes, and I clicked the first one that came up, and it called for oil. Well, I'm now learning that real sourdough bread does not call for oil. It should just be your starter, your water, salt, flour, things like that. So I will not be using this recipe anymore, so I'm not going to link it down below. But like I said, we're all going to make some mistakes here. So I just followed that recipe. I added in my water, my starter, I mixed it up. And another mistake I made is you are supposed to mix your starter and your water, then add your flour and then your salt. You're not supposed to put your salt in right away. That's something that I did. So we're adding in all the things into our bowl. I ordered some Danish dough whisks off of Amazon. I can link them down below for you. It came in a pack of 2, and for whatever reason, it was actually cheaper to buy the pack of 2 than it was to just buy one. I've only used it a couple of times, but I like it very much. It seems to be good quality. We'll see how it holds up over time. But I'm adding my salt in right away, which I guess you're not supposed to do. I've also read in a lot of places that people say don't be afraid to break the sourdough rules. You don't have to wait to add your salt. You can just dump it in. I think sourdough is also intimidating to a lot of people because of the time commitment that it takes. And I don't really know if that time commitment is going to be less now that my sourdough starter is put together. It's not going to be so much of a daily task. The bread making portion was actually very easy, and for whatever reason, that was the portion that was most intimidating to me, was actually being able to like lift and fold and turn and tuck and do all the things that you're supposed to do for sourdough bread. So it was a lot easier in that aspect than what I was anticipating. Making the dough was fairly simple, but who knows? I'm sure that we are all going to have days where it becomes really crazy and really overwhelming, and the last thing we want to do is tuck and fold our sourdough bread. So I'm sure that it's going to land on both ends of the spectrum, and that's just the reality of life. Some days are going to be a little bit more difficult, and some days are going to feel easy breezy. So my oldest was in the kitchen with me. She gave it a mix, and then it got really tough, and she's like, Mom, you have to turn this. So then I wanted to pull my recipe back up and see if they had a picture of like what the texture was supposed to look like, what the dough was supposed to look like, because everywhere I had seen online, your dough is very wet, it's very sticky. This was not my dough. So this is another reason I don't think I'm going to use this recipe again. The bread ended up turning out okay, but I was just a little confused or just a little inexperienced, and that's how we're all going to be the first time we do something. So I decided, you know what, we're just going to go with it. We're going to see what happens. It is what it is. I gave it a little hand mix just so I could try to feel the texture. That way, if the bread worked out, I kind of knew what it should feel like. Put it on with some saran wrap, and we let that proof all night. This is 5 a.m. the next morning, and I don't think that I woke up at 5 a.m. just to do my sourdough bread. It was actually something that happened really naturally. I had just woken up very early and could not go back to sleep to save my life. So I got up and I'm like, you know what? The house is quiet. Let's light a candle, drink some coffee, and kind of shape this sourdough bread. So that's what I did. Don't think that I'm like an amazing housewife or something like that. That was not it. So I ended up dumping out my sourdough. I took my little like plastic bench scraper and scraped out all of that dough that got stuck in here. I'm also learning that that's a sign that your bread was overproofed, which definitely could be a thing. I think this bread sat and proofed for like 15 hours total. So that's definitely a possibility. So next time I will try not to let it go quite as long, but that's okay. I ended up scraping all that out, getting it on the counter, and this was another little mistake that I made in my 5 a.m. kerfuffle. The coffee hadn't quite hit in yet, and I forgot to flour my counter, so things were sticking a little bit, but that's okay. And then I proceeded to do what I see all the sourdough Instagram people do, which is bring it out into kind of like a rectangle and then fold it in on itself and start to kind of shape it into a ball with my little scraper here. So that's what I did. It didn't stick to the counter as bad as I had thought that it was going to initially, which I was very grateful for. So I ended up just kind of doing that little swoopy motion that you see everybody do and thinking, okay, I've got this. This bread is going to be amazing and delicious, and I'm really happy with that. So after I kind of swooped it all together, I scooped it up and put it in my little proofing basket. And this whole time I had already started preheating my oven to 400 degrees with my Dutch oven inside so that it could be nice and warm. So that way, when our sourdough was done doing its last like 40 minute rise, the Dutch oven would be heated up, ready to go, and we could just plop it right in. So this is another little mistake I made. Also did not flour my little proofing basket, which is okay, but a little mistake moving forward. I would make sure that I at least gave it a little bit of a flour. I've also learned that when your hands are wet, the sourdough won't stick to your hands quite as much. So next time I will make sure that my hands are a little wet. That way I don't get all of the sourdough pieces kind of sticking to my fingers like you see here. But the bench scraper worked really well to get it off, and then just washed my hands like normal. It wasn't something that kind of lingered with me, if you will. So we got that in our proofing basket, and we just kind of let that go for 30 minutes, like I said, while our oven preheated to 400 degrees or 450, and we just kind of sat around for 30 minutes, drank our coffee, and waited for the timer to go off. I dumped my sourdough right on to my parchment paper squares, and you can see because I didn't flour my basket, it got a little stuck. So this is where I'm saying that I definitely should have floured it. It's okay, it came out. It wasn't like a super big deal or anything. I'm just gonna have to wash my basket liner, which is probably like, it's really not that big of a deal, but just a little mistake I made. I went ahead and plopped that into my very hot Dutch oven and went ahead and scored the top. I went for a very basic design because I really just didn't know what the heck I was doing. But here you can see I finally pulled out a little bit of flour and floured my dough, finally, right? So the coffee had obviously started to kick in at this point. I picked that up, plopped it into my Dutch oven, and like I said, just scored each side a little bit. This is one thing that I would definitely do, is score it a little bit deeper than I initially did. I think the design could have been, or the cuts, I guess, could have been maybe a little bit more, but that's definitely okay. Like I said, we're all learning together here. So I plopped that in my Dutch oven with the lid on for 20 minutes. And I also lowered the temperature on my oven from 450 to 400. Put that in there, like I said, for 20 minutes and just kind of let it cook and do its thing. And then after the 20 minutes, we're gonna go take the lid off of our Dutch oven and let it cook for another 40. So when you are going to take the lid off of your Dutch oven after the 20-minute mark, it should be kind of pale, a little pasty, looking a little sad, which is definitely what it looked like, and I'll show you guys that here in a sec. So once we put that in our oven for the next 40 minutes, the timer goes off and it is time to pull out your sourdough bread. So I pulled that out, very excited and very anxious. It smelled delicious. The whole house just smelled amazing, and I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I think next time, per my husband's request, I would cook it just a little bit longer. He said it was a little bit doughy in the center, so I'm going to cook it just a hair longer per his recommendation. I pulled that out of the Dutch oven very carefully because it was scalding hot, so I was trying to figure out the best way to pull it out. I let that cool completely. I mean, for like over an hour, I let it just sit out on the counter like this until kind of everybody started to wake up and the house got moving, and we cut into it and we ate it with dinner that night. So that is kind of the story of my sourdough bread. I am really happy that I decided to film this process because within sharing just little glimpses of my sourdough bread journey, a lot of people had said thank you for giving us updates, talking about how your starter feels like it's taking forever, or how you're making some mistakes or something like that, because they also feel like they are going through those things and they're seeing people on Instagram or wherever, maybe on YouTube, and it seems like their sourdough starter just comes to life in a couple of days, and that's not always the case. So I wanted to share that, and thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with me. I hope that your sourdough starter comes and you can get some sourdough bread going, some sourdough bagels. If you guys have a tried and true sourdough bread recipe, I would love for you to leave it down in the comments for me, or you could have your favorite sourdough discard recipes, or I'm looking to make bagels or something like that. I would love those recipes, and thank you guys, as always, for choosing to take time out of your day to hang out with me in my kitchen. It's an honor to have you guys here, and I hope that you guys are staying safe, staying warm if you guys are in the Midwest, and of course, I will see you guys in another video.